My name is Omar Escobar. I'm the district attorney for the 229th Judicial District, and those include Starr County, Jim Hogg, and Duval counties. Not going to give.
District.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I do have a couple of comments. I'm going to try to keep them short. They advised me, I was advised to keep them as short as possible, so I'm going to try, and then I'm going to defer to some questions. A couple of things that I want to share the members of the committee's concern, and of course my fellow prosecutors, about wanting to protect a fundamental right, that is our right to vote. And of course we want to make sure that voters' right to vote is protected, but we need to make sure that it's the voters' vote, not somebody else's vote. Okay. I think we can all agree on that. I mean, there's nothing controversial about that notion. And so a couple of things that we want to talk about is that some of the things that it looks like we're talking about is that on the one hand, we're going to have the investigative side of election fraud. And on the other side, you're going to have the prosecution side. Okay? Both sides are going to have challenges. Okay? One, for a prosecutor, the easier topic for me to talk about is prosecutors. Sort of when we get an election fraud case, whether it's a county attorney or a district attorney. I was discussing this with Shannon earlier, and I'm not sure that local district attorneys or county attorneys have really made, and I don't want to speak for everybody, have really made it a top priority in terms of our prosecutions, because we're dealing with child sexual assaults, we're dealing with murders, we're dealing with kidnappings, we're dealing with a whole bunch of things that are already strained resources, have difficulty dealing with and on a day-to-day basis. And so it's not something that we've always been able to sort of move up the priority list. A lot of times we've been conditioned to just, well, we got an election fraud case, let's just kick it over to the Attorney General's office and let them kind of focus on it. And so one of the things that has happened, I think, over the years is that it's clear that we won't know about a case until months after, sometimes even years. We won't know that it happened. And so that's a little consolation to a person who lost a race because of the election fraud. So some of the things that we've been doing, at least in my jurisdiction, is, of course, when I found out about SB 5, we didn't have a lot of information about what the changes were. So we kind of I had to do our own research, figure out, okay, what's going on, what's being implemented, and when do we implement it. So most of the changes that would have affected our counties would have taken effect in December 1, 2017. So what I did was I started sort of media campaign, social media campaign, to educate our population, our workers, about what the legal sort of changes were, so that they could not claim that they didn't know what they were getting into, they didn't know that the law had changed. So I tried to do my best to sort of educate them on the changes in the law. There is a federal lawsuit currently against the county of Starr, involving, sort of loosely, the claims are that there are more registered voters than eligible voters. And so I took a particular interest in that after November, and then interest in the laws, the SB 5, subsequent to that. And so what I did was I sat down with the elections administrator and sort of talked about, do you all know what SB 5 did? In other words, are you aware of some of the changes in the law? And so from there started a conversation about, we went into non-U.S. citizens who were registered to vote. Okay, it should be clear that for us, that at least in Starr County, and I don't know for the rest of Texas or in the nation, but that non-U.S. citizens are registered to vote is beyond question. Okay, that is beyond question. That non-U.S. citizens have been voting in our elections should be beyond question also. There is evidence in Starr County that I won't go into, but that has happened. And we learned of this recently. So as recently as the 2016 election, that's going to happen. That we have felons who should not be voting and did vote, or not eligible to vote. That has also happened. So these are some of the sort of subjects that we've been covering. Most recently, and so this is what I want to talk about. Most recently, with the implementation of our amended laws, and of course our new laws for election fraud, we look at the fraudulent use of an application for ballot by mail. And some of the things we're seeing is that years ago, in Starr County, you might have an election worker who worked at the food pantry, giving out meals to, or giving out food to elderly people. And this would have been the same person who goes out to these persons. And the way it works, we need to understand how this works. So you have an application for ballot by mail. You run it through a copy machine and you get a whole bunch of them. You get a stack, right? And so a politiquera or election worker, vote harvester, what do you want to call it? You can have 100, 200, 300 applications. And they can start working a year in advance, months or a year in advance or more, just going to the persons that they know, maybe that they're giving food to, whoever or whatever, a church or whatever it might be, however they know these people. I think in our situation is that they're going to present the application to them. And they're going to say, do you want to vote? You're going to vote? Yes. Okay, go ahead and sign. So they get a signature on a blank application, okay, on a blank application for ballot by mail. As an election gets called, we start filling in the rest of this is where it's going to be the May election, it's going to be a March election, it's going to be a November election. They're already made, they're stacks, okay? And you have election workers who are across the county collecting the signatures and then filling in the data later on. Yeah, no, this is the way it works. So how do I know this? Because our investigators have been working on it, and it has been no small feat to begin to interview people as to how you do this. So I want you all to understand sort of the process here. You have heard testimony here about several entities, sending applications to the same voter, and you're getting all kinds of different applications at one time, confusing voters. They don't know what's going on, and so that's the process. And so we had some recent arrests, and what we've been seeing is that you have a politiquera who's going to go to a voter and say, who's otherwise ignorant of this application. I don't know how many people in your own district will know how to fill out an application for ballot by mail. I'm going to venture to say very few to none are going to know. They rely on the politiquera to do this, okay? So what is in our situation is that a lot of them were filling out disabled. We had a registered nurse. We had a firefighter. We had otherwise people who confessed that we are not disabled. Who did this? Well, the politiquera did it. And and I believe them. Well, I mean, I have no reason to doubt them. The politiquera filled out so who do we blame?
Mr. Ashworth.
Yes.
Just say
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
you were saying, sophisticated.
Right. So exactly. So we have a situation where the worker is going out, and so you might ask yourself, well, why would any worker want to fill out an application for ballot by mail and state disabled when the person is not disabled? Clearly not disabled. And the election code gives us a very clear enough definition, I think, of disability, which is a whole different ball of wax, but it's clear enough. And so, in other words, there should be some kind of physical disability that prevents you from going to the polling location.
Okay.
Absent that, you're not disabled, okay? And so some of these persons, they say, no, I'm not disabled. I don't even know why. And they start asking themselves, well, who put disability? Well, the assistant did and then they'll talk about what happened. So why do you want to do that? Well, it's very simple. It's to ensure that the vote is going the particular way that you want it to go. Sure. I mean, you get a ballot, you take you apply for it, the ballot is sent to the House, and at the House you have the assistant that's right with you saying, we're going to vote now. So they've got the ballot there, and they start filling it out with the voter. Who's overseeing that? It's almost impossible. You'd have to interview each voter to sort of figure it out. Luckily for us, we've been able to do that a couple of times, or a few times, to be able to go through that. Of course, it is now an offense to attempt to influence the vote in the presence of the ballot. Kind of figuring when that happens is a challenge. So that's the process. Is that So now we're seeing a whole bunch of disabled people that are not disabled, clearly not disabled, saying that they're disabled so that they get the ballot. And now this is the fundamental problem. I think you know this. If we have 30,000 registered voters in Starr County, let's make that assumption at this point, and let's assume that the county election is we're going to have turnout for 10,000 votes. Okay, we're going to expect 10,000 votes for a county election, statewide election, whatever. In this particular election cycle for the 2018 Democratic primary, we had approximately 2,000 applications for ballot by mail. 2,000. Okay, and imagine this: we got 2,000. All right, and so we're looking at if let's assume that 10,000 come out to vote. That's 20%. Assuming everybody, receives a ballot, and everybody votes it. We got 20% of our population voting by mail. So understand now what happens. Just imagine for a moment, you have 2,000 applications out, or 2,000 ballots sort of floating around in the community somewhere in mailboxes. What do you think is going to happen? I mean, it's an invitation for fraud. It's going to happen. So what ends up happening, of course, politiqueros or workers are going to try to get to them as quickly as possible. They're going to go to the voter. They're going to say, has the mail-in come in yet? Yes. Okay, let's vote it right now. So they're going to stand right next to the voter and, okay, let's vote it right now. And when a politiquera is right on top of you, it can be intimidating. All right?
Sure.
Of course they're going to be checking who you're going to vote for. And they put it in the ballot envelope. You're going to put it in the carrier envelope, and you're going to mail it off, and you've got a sure vote. So what's a politiquera going to do? If I've got if you're a worker and you've got a stack of 100 votes, and you go to somebody and say, hey, I've got 100 sure votes. What are you going to do? Of course, this is what our system has come to, and so it's going to breed this. So some of the prosecutions we're working on is that some of the workers have started listing a whole bunch of people that are disabled just to ensure that particular vote. And now we're getting through some of the media, their defense attorneys are kind of saying, well, it's the voter's fault. It's not the worker's fault, and let's blame the voter now. So what's going to happen is it's going to have a standoff in court where the voter is going to, I think, say, somebody signed this, I didn't mark disabled. And then you're going to have the politiquero, the defense attorney, is going to come in and say, well, you should have known. I don't know that in many of our cases we can really blame the voter. In the same way that Senator Zaffirini has indicated, jump over to voter registrations. A lot of the registrations over the last 10 years, 20 years, has been through DPS. You go to DPS, you're going to get your license? Yes. Do you want to register to vote? Yes. You're a U.S. citizen? Yes, maybe. So yes, and then you're registered to vote. That's it. So then they go and vote, and they're voting, but they won't necessarily know what happens. If you ask me, I don't think DPS should be in the business of registering voters. That should be for elections administrators. They have I don't think they have any business of registering voters. So, and now that's going to be a new offense also, because under election fraud, registering to vote when you know you're not a U.S. citizen is going to be, now we've got to start, and then you vote, so it's going to be illegal voting. It can also be, because it's an official election form, you've also committed the offense of election fraud. So sort of these are the things that we are seeing in Starr County, and I think these are some of the things that I think we're going to be addressing as far as prosecutions. And now I share Mr. White's notion that you have to work with the prosecutors. I just can't see a possibility. I can't see a situation where you all can provide enough funding, the legislature can provide enough funding to the Attorney General's office to have an army of investigators go out to 254 counties or wherever there's election irregularities and kind of investigate them all, sort of put them up at hotels and hope that they find their way around local communities. It's not going to happen. This cannot be done without the help of local assisted, either district attorneys or county attorneys. I just don't see it happening without, and not an effective prosecution. I can't see that happening. So these are the kind of issues, and one of the important things that I want to mention is that we found this out because I sat down with the elections administrator and just had a conversation with them. That's it. All I had to do was, and they themselves said, Omar, I want you to see these applications for ballot by mail. I want you to see this. I said 5 people in the same household are disabled, and they're 20-some years old. They're 20-some years old. What would have happened is that the elections administrator would have called the Secretary of State. They would have called the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State is going to say, Mr. Ingram is probably going to tell you this. You can't question it. You're not investigators. So they would have taken that to mean, well, it's insulated from investigation. Why we don't, let's kill it right here. We don't go any further. What happened is, in this particular case, is we looked at it and said, well, nothing prevents me from investigating this. So we did the follow-up, and that's when we started learning about the fraud. But it began with a discussion with the elections administrator. It begins there. We don't go any further with tackling election fraud without the help of elections administrators. It's almost, how many voters are going to go complain about election fraud to a local PD or to a sheriff's department? It doesn't happen. It's going to be right there with the elections administrators. And I don't want to, well, let me add to a little bit of what Mr. White said. I think there is a duty for ballots that have been rejected. I think there is now a duty in the law that requires elections administrators to either send that information to the Attorney General's office or to the Secretary of State. I don't know which state agency it is, but so they're supposed to now send that information to them, and I'm pretty sure they're going to come right back to us and tell us, hey, do you think you can pick up the ball and investigate this stuff? The advantages of having a local district attorney having the resources. Most of us do not. We're going to tell you right now. We don't have the resources to be focusing on election fraud. The advantages, though, that we have is that we might have local investigators that know the area, we know the people. We can just look at, here's the complaint, let's go and talk to the person. Tell us about it. We can investigate it, we can interview people, we can document it, we can record it. Much easier than the Attorney General's office can. There's just no other way. And the Secretary of State really, with all due respect, I don't know that they really have the ability to get in the enforcement game on this side. I just don't see that it really, the AG's office and the local DAs are the ones that can do this. So having mentioned some of the challenges that we have, I think right now we have this issue of disability, of applications for ballot by mail being sort of harvested in this particular way. But that's a loophole because in the past, elections administrators were not allowed to question disability claims. So now, looking forward, the next frontier of fraud is going to be, I'm going to tell you what I think, is this idea, I think, and I don't know that AG's office has seen this, but assisted voting. You're going to ask for assistance. The code indicates that it's either because you can't read, write, or see. Read the language, or read, write, or see either one. So what's happening is that you're going to have workers, you're going to have candidates that are going to, there's going to be a voter who gets down and, well, you're going to vote, yeah, okay, I'm going to assist you. But I don't need assistance. No, you do need assistance. We're going to assist you. But I don't need assistance. No, we're going to assist you. Okay, so they'll go in and they'll sign the affidavit that they need assistance, and you can't, the presiding judge can't even ask about needing assistance, about the real requirement for assistance. So I think what you're going to have now is just an army of sort of workers insisting on assisting people and bringing them in and saying, no, we're going, so why do you want to assist a voter that doesn't need assistance? It's to ensure that they vote the particular way that that person is being paid to, bring in the vote for them. So I think that's going to be the next frontier as far as our election battles, and then election fraud battles. And then I'm going to recommend something else because there's another area is that our definition of residency really needs to be cleaned up. I mean, it really does.
It's a state of mind in Texas.
Well, but and I'm going to say it affects the local elections more than anything else. So we might have adjoining counties that we might have, okay, all of a sudden you get people registered. For example, we talked about this. One of the last elections, we had like 16, 17 people registered in one address. Re-registered. So I call it precinct jumpers. I think he called them precinct hoppers and whatever. They're jumping precincts or even county lines to vote in a particular election. I think we need to we're going to need to tighten up because it's impossible for 17 people that I know have a homestead in another county come out and claim residency and say, well, it's really a state of mind. And I think that if we look at the election cases, the civil cases, there's been more litigation regarding in election fraud case, election contests. More of the issues that arise have to do with residency than in any other issue as far as election fraud. Yeah, if you look at the survey, that the election contest cases, they're gonna sort of be centered around mail-in ballots and the definition of residency. So, having said that, I'll field any questions.
Mr. Esquire, I think your Senator has a question for you.
Thank you
For your testimony.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. District Attorney, for your excellent testimony. I appreciate it, and appreciate your representing our mutual constituents in 3 counties, doing a wonderful job. First of all, what prompted you to spearhead this investigation?
Sure, like I said, SB 5 came around. The legislature passed SB 5, and I noticed that in SB 5 there were changes to the way applications for ballot by mail would be handled. And basically any misrepresentation in an application for ballot by mail is now a felony offense. And so now, because we have a county attorney, it would be now an offense in which we have jurisdiction. And so I noticed that, and then we had election fraud, and then we had one of the other changes was that now the voter needs to go deposit the ballot themselves in the mail. The politiquera can't go grab it anymore. There's how it gets enforced is sort of the issue. But so a politiquera can't go grab your ballot anymore and deposit it in the mail for you. You have to be physically unable to deposit it yourself. So some of these laws, I was prompted to do this because SB 5 came about, and I wanted to educate and December 1 would have been the effective date of these new laws. If we had a whole bunch of these violations, we were going to have probably a lot of complaints, and they would have gone directly to the AG's office, and they probably would have said, well, we didn't know anything about it. So I began a public education campaign first about these new laws, knowing full well that there's a lot of mailed in that comes in Starr County, and in Duval and Jim Hogg, by the way. But I think more in Starr County. So I wanted to alert people to that. And then I go back to this election lawsuit. There's a federal lawsuit, which was, I know that there was some activity in November. And so I also had an interest as to what was going on with that lawsuit. So when I learned more about that particular lawsuit, that's when I find out about non-residents being registered to vote and how that's going on. So I began to look into that aspect also. And so figuring, well, how big is the problem? And I'll tell you right now, figuring out how big the problem is going to require a lot of work. It's very difficult to figure out. Yes, we're going to have to go back. I mean, there's no other way right now other than to go back and look at the jury summons and see who said they were not U.S. citizens, grab them, and then go interview them. There's really no other way to do this, and then you got to sort of compare it against the voter registration rolls and then figure out whether they voted or not. And then we come back to your question. Did they know?
Exactly.
Or not? Do we leave it to a jury? Do we leave it to a grand jury? In their case, it always helps to have a confession. And for a prosecutor, we're not always going to have a confession, and so that's going to be a challenge. So that's what prompted where we're at. It began as a public education campaign, and then it became, in January 1, it became an investigation.
But see, I agree with you that we need education. That was the point I made earlier.
Yeah.
I was mortified about Senate Bill 5 and how many people would not know about it.
Right.
So on my Facebook, I went and posted the whole thing,
Right.
violation by violation, and immediately phone calls. Who's she pointing fingers at?
Right. Well, sure, and I did the same thing, and I think that people begin to start thinking exactly, well,
Who are you after?
Who are you after? But it's hard to say that you're after anybody when you're saying December 1,
Exactly.
Look, we're telling you right now, these are violations. If you still want to do them, then now it's on you. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, we had one case where a person died and they submitted an application for ballot by mail like 2 weeks after. They dated the application for ballot by mail 2 weeks after the person died. What possible explanation can you give me to justify post-dating an application for ballot by mail? what if the Elections Administration Office hadn't caught it?
Right.
The ballot goes out. What if it comes back voted? And then it gets counted. You know, in this case, the county clerk did their job. They sent the death certificate over, and they caught it. What if they hadn't? And what if the elections, county clerk's office had not really sent that information? And going back to our county judge that has voted post-death.
Not the current county.
No. This would be a former from the 80s.
Deceased.
Sure, a deceased county judge. Well, how does that happen? Well, probably because the death certificate has never made its way to the Elections Administration Office to be processed. So what do? You probably have to go back. I don't even want to delve into that. I don't know whose responsibility is going to be, but can the county clerk go back 20, 30 years to all the death certificates and send them all over to the Elections Administrator? And someone's going to be tasked with that job, and someone's going to be asking for money to do that. So does it have to be done? Yes. We took on the responsibility of the felons. I don't think our district clerk at that point had really done a comprehensive list or made a comprehensive list of everybody who's on probation and sent them over to elections. We did that on ourselves. So we had to go and grab everybody who's on probation, make a list, who's ineligible to vote, send them over, and then let them enter them into the data, strike those people, and then go back and check whether they voted. We just had these arrests recently, this week, of persons who voted who were felons. It's illegal voting. So there's a lot of there has to be a lot of communication between the respective clerk's offices to sort of clean up the voter registration rolls. And I'm not sure that that's always been done because every county is its own world when it comes to elections.
And you're talking mostly about the mail-in ballots, but are you concerned at all about violating Senate Bill 5 in terms of advising someone in the presence of a ballot? For example, I was at a restaurant sitting with my niece last week, and I was talking to her, and across the way I saw two people talking, and one person had the mail-in ballot. It's a person with a disability who was out of town for medical treatment, and she was talking to a relative, and they were going over the ballot, and I'm going, oh my God.
Well, there are some exceptions though for relatives. I think there's close relatives or people who live in the house that they're allowed to talk about that. I think the election fraud statute, the way that we want to apply it, has to do with really a politiquera who sort of comes in and says, "This is how you're going to vote." I think most recently, and last week, I think we got one particular set of persons who indicated that they took our ballot. Well, did you vote it? And this came from the daughter. And so the elderly parents, no, they came in and they did it all and they sent it off.
Well, I looked around to see if there were any cameras.
Well, so am I concerned? So to answer your question,
Seriously?
am I concerned? Yeah, of course. I think we're concerned with, the influence of. I go back to this. Once you've got ballots out floating around, and you've got somebody has an interest in winning an election. Of course, there's going to be somebody who's going to try to deliver the ballots.
Well, this was outside my district. It wasn't in my district, but I got up and went and told those people, "Are you aware of this new law?"
Right. But I agree with you. There has to be more of a public information campaign.
There has to be.
But we did it I think we did it in Starr County. I think we did it in Jim Hall County and also in Duval counties. So we do need a little bit more education on that. And I am concerned about influencing the ballot. At home by some of these workers, yes.
Do you believe that election administrators should be required to report any fraud?
Well, if I say that, I'm going to have to also recommend to you that you fund them, give them more money. So, yes, of course, because if you look at it, we're not really the hubs of the information. The prosecutors are not the hub. We come in after the fact, after there's an investigation. Sometimes we will come in at the front end to help investigate, and that's always better. But realistically, all of your irregularities the information is going to come from the elections administrators. It's natural for a voter to want to go to the elections administrator to complain to somebody, and who do you complain to? The elections administrator. Yeah, so of course, I think they should be required to report any irregularity that they see, no matter how slight. We'll take care of investigating it. We'll tell you whether there was an offense.
That's right.
But if there's an irregularity, just report it to us. How do you define irregularity? Well,
That's
there's a
another
rub.
issue.
But send it to the DA's office, send it to the county attorney, we'll figure it out. Okay, we'll go interview people.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, before I continue my line of questioning, We have been
Of course.
joined by a group of students, and I'd like to be recognized to introduce them.
Of course, please do, Senator.
Mr. Escobar, two are from your hometown, I believe. You're from Starr County, Brenda Bettis and Erica Lucio, and four other students from Laredo, from McAllen, Belton, and McAllen, and there are 6 students who represent the Texas Occupational Therapy Association, and they came by just to hear you.
Great.
Mr. Chairman, if we may welcome the students to
Welcome,
them.
please. We're glad you're here. Welcome to your capital. And Texas City.
I get to see you in action. Thank you.
Any other questions? That
Yes,
you
I
might
do
Sure,
have
go
some
ahead.
more.
Yeah.
And frankly, I wanted to emphasize that you seem to indicate that you did not believe that most of the voter fraud was by voters, but by participants in the voting process. For example, the politiqueras and perhaps officials, but not by voters themselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I think what we can. So let me cover this subject also now that I have the opportunity. Mr. White is correct that we're always in the best position to be able to, and by we I mean we're talking about local law enforcement, local prosecutors. When we get a report, we're right in the position to investigate it immediately, right then and there. It's very difficult to prosecute a case that we won't know about 6 months after. It's almost impossible. So I think that's where we need to sort of focus on as far as election fraud and the frauds that we're dealing with. So really, that's where our focus needs to be, Senator, as far as the investigations that need to happen fairly soon. And so, in terms of voter fraud and the irregularities, I think most of it we can say is from the election workers who are pressuring voters to get to vote in a particular way so that they can deliver the results to whoever is they're working for. Okay, and so I think that's where sort of the issue is. And I think so. Do we blame the voter or do we blame the worker that's marking disabled? Because somebody's telling them you can vote by mail. Anybody can vote by mail. Clearly, that's wrong. That's not the law. And so it's very hard to blame the voter. I mean, I think it's difficult. I think the AG's office is taking the same position that it's difficult to blame the voter for something that a politiquera or the worker did. They just signed.
And again, that's my point. And
Sure.
but just the term itself, voter fraud,
Yeah.
blames the voter.
Exactly,
But
but in practice, it's not really. The fraud is not on really the voter.
Exactly.
It's whoever's trying to get their vote. So that's the problem.
So we have to develop new terminology
Sure, yeah.
instead of voter fraud, because
So,
we're automatically blaming the voter.
Are they victims, or are they really the persons who engaged in the fraud?
Well, do you believe that no excuse voting by mail would be a solution? That why would people need an excuse to vote by mail?
No excuse voting by mail.
Just if
So
you
in other words,
prefer-
just vote by mail.
If you prefer to.
Whoever wants to vote by mail can vote by mail. That would not be a good idea.
would not be good.
And no, I would not recommend it. It's going to give us a lot more work. Because the problem is, I still see the issue. Anytime you have ballots that are outside of the polling location, you're going to invite fraud. It's going to happen. It's human. There are persons that are going to get paid to bring in the votes, and they need to go and chase down the votes the best way that they can. So to answer your question, with all due respect, Senator, I would never recommend everybody voting by mail. Elections administrators, I think everywhere would say, no way. But yeah, no. So it invites fraud. So no, I don't believe that that's a good
Well,
solution.
would it be your testimony then that online voting also would exacerbate fraud?
There is online. Dealing with online security and dealing with cybersecurity issues is just a way different animal that I'm qualified to talk about. If there were appropriate security, and that's a big if there were appropriate security procedures for online voting, I'm sure that would be the utopia of voting. Everybody can vote by via computer. That presents, I think, other challenges. But would I like to see it? Sure. Anything that makes voting more convenient without sacrificing the integrity of the ballot and the process is to be, it should be advanced. I just don't know what kind of Pandora's box we're opening to online voting. But yeah, I think that's something that can be explored at some point or another. Sure.
Thank you. Of the cases that you're investigating, do you know how they would break down in terms of persons who are simply trying to vote more conveniently and not go to the polls versus people who are ineligible and trying to vote by mail, or persons who are impersonating another one, or a person voting multiple times, such as the case that I mentioned earlier?
Most of the persons, the disability cases that we've been talking about, it's just somebody who you can call it convenience voting. In other words, they're saying, a politiquera is going to them and saying, do you want to vote at home? Well, who's going to say no? So they're going to say, yeah, sure, yes, it's convenience voting, yes, sure. But the politiquera knows, at least should know, that you can't be marking somebody disabled when they're not.
So most are convenience voting.
Yeah, of the ones that we're seeing, except the dead person's vote, I think that's not a convenience vote.
No, that's impersonation.
But going outside of that, sure, on the disability, we've got the convenience. I think that's the sales pitch, not knowing that they've been violating the law.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Birdwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. District Attorney, good to see you again. I think I'd met you in Starr County a couple years ago when I was down there with
Border Security.
Director McCraw on Border Security and what you and your team have been doing. So thank you very much. For the record, I got a pretty good idea. You're using a Spanish word that I'm not going to be able to say it as well, but politiquero.
Politiquera.
That's good enough. It's close enough, sure.
I'll say it for him. Just I'll say politiquera.
Yeah, it's an election worker. Yeah,
but would you? Is it an election worker or is it a campaign? Would you, for those, because this is being recorded and folks may be listening, I got a pretty good idea in context because I've been listening to your testimony. But would you define what that is?
Well, it's going to be a campaign worker, somebody that's hired by a candidate to sort of get out the vote. And let's not,
So it's not a public public elections administrator official by any means.
Absolutely not. This is not a government.
I didn't think so.
It's not a government official. There's no way.
Right.
No. We're talking about.
Call it, if I may, a vote harvester.
Sure. A vote harvester. But see, the thing about it is you have a negative connotation. There are persons that will go out and sort of ask for the vote, try to electioneer.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with with a candidate asking or hiring people.
Well, because look, to Senator Zaffarini's point, I just had several months back a candidate in Ellis County was doing exactly this. So it's not just solely in the border,
right?
But my main reason for wanting the definition is so that those that are not here in the room but watching or will listen to this later on have a clear understanding of is it a campaign worker?
It's a campaign worker. So politiquera really means a campaign worker, not a government employee or a government worker or election worker. No.
And they're incentivized based upon the number of votes they go get to bring in these votes or get people to say they're disabled or.
Well, they're incentivized.
I assume there's a financial incentive associated with this.
Well, of course, there's going to be a financial incentive to go and grab as many mail-ins as you can. It is, of course, illegal to set sort of a number, performance-based system that we already have those on the books. That a person is going to be hired to bring in X number per day of mail-ins or go grab as many mail-ins as you can, or sort of a quota system. So, but. That's not to say that every campaign worker is somehow engaged in this conduct, because there are campaign workers who are spreading the word of their candidate, and that's different.
Completely lawful.
Yeah, completely lawful. And I'm going to say that most of them are. It's the persons that are chasing down mail-ins. That's really where I think the problems begin to arise. Is the persons that have an incentive to go and grab the ballot and maybe guarantee a certain number of votes to a candidate. That's really sort of the issue, the problem. Because, like I've said, can't overstate it. You have the situation where a worker is going to have stacks of applications that they've been working on a year in advance. They're going to have a stack ready, and when the election rolls around, here's a stack. So who's going to, who's going to go grab them, and who's going to hire me to sort of go get the vote? Yeah.
You'd mentioned earlier in your testimony that you thought that our elections officials would need additional dollars. I don't know what the mix is, or if there is a mix between state and county. But if you or a county attorney or some combination of the two do the investigating, why would if there's a duty to report that I think I have a problem here, I think what the AG was getting at wasn't so much the duty to report of an election administrator to the local authority. It was that, and the local authority being county at that point, but that the county had an obligation to report to the state, both the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, so that exactly as you said, you know the ground better than the state officials are going to know, but the state officials may be the lead entity and sharing the authority with you and your knowledge of exactly what we did on border security in many respects.
Right.
Is that duty to report, where do you see the financial need? If it's simply they're reporting what they're seeing, why does that incur additional financial?
Well, maybe see, the thing about it is for elections administrators, and it's a question they're going to have to answer themselves. But I think after an election, you may have, and remember that there's already a process. I think the Secretary of State already has a formal election complaint form that you can sort of forward to them. And then I think they might send it to the AG's office, and then the AG's office might send it back to the locals, and there's this circle that goes around. So there's already a process by which the Secretary of State can deal, because they don't have enforcement authority, so they're going to send it to the prosecutors. And but elections administrators, if you impose a duty on them to go ahead and grab the paperwork, grab the complaints, and maybe sort of take down affidavits and statements, because you're going to have the voter right there in front of you. Some of those statements may be evidence, and so now you're going to impose a duty on them to sort of do a little bit of more digging. You've got an election complaint. Why don't you come over here and let's get it down on affidavit? So now you're asking them to sort of write down some of the things, unless what you all are going to do is, well, if you get a complaint, just give it to the DA's office or to the county attorney and let them go and do investigations. Then maybe they don't need more resources to do that. I mean, that's really for them to tell you. I'm just saying, anytime you give them the local more duties, they're probably going to say, we need more money. And that's just the reality.
Yeah.
I'm just speaking generally, broadly, but I would prefer that they address how that duty would impact them.
We've done a lot with CPS, but we don't have the dollars to create an army of Attorney General,
Sure.
personnel to come down and help you. Mr. Chairman, just in regards to the comments about online voting, just given what we've seen with fraudulent or fake accounts, I mean, I would share your concerns about. I mean, at least I know if the UPS has got to have an address to go show up, deliver a ballot, and get it back, I at least have some sort of trail electronically. You could be voting from. I mean, I've heard people talk about doing that militarily, but I don't know. Call me old-fashioned, but I just think that we're not getting this exact. I'd be very hesitant to add another third or fourth layer of a chess game to figure out voter fraud electronically.
And Senator Birdwell, on that, we of course we're really thankful for the expertise of this panel and want to hear from them on that particular issue. We're going to have some testimony on that.
Right.
Everything would help us about the technology, and so we'll get to talk about that some more as we go forward.
Yeah.
Members, I do want to make one point that I haven't, is that things that may have been legal before December 1 were illegal after December 1. I think that's the distinction. And so those are the things that we try to, that's why we needed public education on this. That's what I try to do the best that I could. And so some of the things that prosecutions have been because I've thought that we got enough information out there, and yet that there were still violations, and leads me to believe that it was intentional, knowingly and intentional at that point. So I didn't want to make that particular point.
Mr. Escobar, I just can't thank you enough for this. We know these things go on all over the state. We hear things, but it's hard to find sworn testimony. So hard to track them down. And you've invested limited resources so we can all peer into the keyhole and see what's going on. So thank you for it. And again, your testimony made us think about a lot of things, and things that the state's doing, that we're doing, that could be done better. And it's been really nuanced. And so thank you for this, for letting us know. We appreciate you.